It's Wednesday, October 9th, and this is the 1909 State News' weekly podcast featuring our reporters talking about the news. I'm your host, Alex Walters. This week, students are pushing for a solution to a longtime problem. Young people don't vote. Their proposed answer? No classes on Election Day. Here to tell us all about it, once again, is our politics reporter, Emilio.
Thanks for having me, Alex. 2 weeks in a row
welcome back
now.
to the show. 2 weeks. That's crazy. I mean, don't get used to it. It's an election season. You have kind of an outsized influence around here, but I'm happy to have you. You know, it's good to see you as always. But yeah, so you've been very busy. You've written a great number of stories, but we're here to talk about just one of them. Don't get too eager. About classes on Election Day, or a lack thereof, as students would like. So tell me, you wrote a lot about this kind of push that's going on, and we'll get into that. But first of all, for those listening who aren't MSU students, what are the challenges of an election day at MSU? What does it look like? Why aren't these people voting?
Right. I mean, we can probably just start broadly and talk about young voters in general. I mean, they don't like to go out to the polls often. And it's for a variety of reasons, right? A lot of them just lead busy lives or might not view voting as, a really big priority in their lives. But then as we move to more of an MSU-centric view, I mean, voting here is kind of hard. We go back to 2022 in the midterm elections. Students were in lines for hours. I think some at Brody didn't get their ballots in until 11 p.m. that night. So if you're interested in voting, I mean, there are some serious hurdles on top of classes and work and all those sort of things that students might be having that day.
I mean, if you're voting in person on campus, that's kind of your day. You might end up in line for hours and hours. I remember certain actual candidates were coming and bringing water and phone chargers to try and encourage people in line to stay in line, not get out of line. It was a whole scene.
Yeah.
So then tell me about, you wrote about a group of students that have gotten together and are trying to solve some of these issues. They're not necessarily, I guess, a partisan group one way or the other, as I understand it. They're just trying to encourage students in general to participate politically, to vote. Tell me about this group.
Right. So these are two student organizers, Vasily Evseyev and Madison Russell. They're from a group called UNPAC, as an and then PAC, like political action.
Not unpack like a box.
Exactly.
UNPAC.
UNPAC.
Like they're not a political action committee. They're
not a
PAC.
political action committee.
Yeah.
And their group is kind of focused on just increasing democratic participation and getting young people excited to, again, get involved democratically. And yeah, their whole angle is that classes should not be held on Election Day because it's a serious impediment to voting for a lot of students.
So the idea would be if students had the day off, they might be more willing to take time and actually go through with voting than they would otherwise.
Yeah, and they'd simply have more time to get, they'd have the whole day instead of just, let's say you have, your classes get done at 5 p.m. and then you only have after that. You'd have the whole day instead.
Yeah, and that's their central kind of demand from the university.
Yeah, that's what they're looking for anyways.
Well, and is that something that, I guess, what exactly are they asking for? Is that something that someone in the administration can just do, or is that part of a complicated, larger process?
So it's complicated because the academic calendar is it's a sensitive subject. And there's a lot of people who want their input reflected in how it turns out, right? You've got the faculty senate, you have ASMSU, you have all sorts of administrative people who want it to turn out in a certain way.
Well, and it's set, as I understand it, very specifically years in advance. This isn't just something that's kind of done.
Right, exactly. And there's task committees that have to be formed. In general, it's a slow-moving process. And for these guys, for example, they're not imagining that these changes they're proposing would be in effect for this election cycle. This is something that they're kind of just getting the ball rolling right now and to find success in years to come.
So right now, there's maybe an increased interest in this kind of thinking because it's a presidential election year, but they're not necessarily aiming for by 3 weeks from now when the election actually happens that this is a thing that MSU's done.
Right.
But that would be ideal, I guess.
Yeah, they'd like that for sure.
Yeah, but it's maybe a longer term goal, and right now there's more interest in it.
Right now, they're just trying to get students kind of engaged with the idea,
Yeah.
and again, create that appetite for that sort of change. For that, in a couple of years, when it is feasible to get it, there is sufficient student appetite for that sort of thing.
Well, it'll be interesting if as it is probably likely that if it doesn't come together for this November, to see in a real presidential election year what the lines look like. Obviously, it's different now with higher absentee voting and mail-in voting, but it'll be a really interesting kind of case study for them, right? Of how does this actually play out?
Yeah.
But what about this? Speaking of case studies, I mean, this isn't a unique proposal. You've wrote about how other schools have done this, right?
Right. Yeah, I mean, you look at Wayne State, for example, right, which is in Detroit. They, a couple of years ago, faced this sort of same problem. A lot of students, they have a slightly different situation because Wayne State has a lot of commuter students, but a lot of students were complaining about the difficulties of voting on campus. So the student senate there decided to kind of push the administration to, one, open up a voting location on campus and then also cancel classes on that day. And that kind of succeeded for a couple of reasons. But most importantly was just the fact that a lot of people's interests aligned really well at that specific moment. For the students, it was the fact that they wanted to have classes off on that day so that they could vote. The administration was really interested in kind of reaffirming its commitment to civil rights and democracy. And then the city of Detroit was into it because, well, they'd just like another voting location to be open for students.
So there might have been more kind of universal buy-in there. And also you said this went through like a student government process there. Does Unpack at MSU have that same kind of buy-in or relationship with the undergraduate student government ASMSU?
No, Unpack is a group that kind of exists outside of that administrative body.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of where one of their first challenges comes up is how do you get your idea from an outside group to, into the administrative body? And one way that they're doing that right now is through just trying to demonstrate student interest. They're canvassing in different residence halls and academic buildings. They're trying to collect student signatures just to show that there is enough student interest in this idea.
Is there a lack of appetite from the undergraduate student body as it stands right now? Or the government?
I think right now there's not enough proof from it. There's not enough proof of it. Obviously, the point of getting these signatures is to kind of have like an actual document that demonstrates this many students want this change, and they're willing to sign a piece of paper saying that they want it.
They want to see some sort of proof that students actually would use that extra time to vote and whatnot, and not just a great day off.
Right, exactly.
Not that standing in line to vote all day is not a great day off.
My dream.
Yeah. Well, but what about this? So the politics are a little bit different than that of Wayne State. It might have been easier there. I saw recently, totally outside of Michigan, Ohio State did this, and then there was an interesting kind of throwing a hat in the ring from Barb Byram, the local clerk. What did she say? She's into this idea?
Right, yeah. So Ingham County Clerk Barb Byram tweets out just saying like, hey, Ohio State just announced that classes are going to be canceled this November. And then just, adds Kevin Guskowitz saying, hey, you should maybe get in on this.
Yeah.
But we'll really have to see where the ball gets from that. We haven't really seen anything out of MSU as to which direction they're leaning.
That's an interesting sort of local endorsement from a relatively powerful figure. Well, Emilio, thanks for telling us about this very interesting proposal. If students are interested, I'm sure they can find Unpack and get into this effort. But yeah, so that's all for now, and we'll be back next week with fresh reporting from the great minds here at the State News. Hopefully not Emilio for a third week in a row, but maybe. I don't know. He keeps writing great stories.
You're sick
One
of
about
me.
Project 2025 was good. Vigil Story was good. But yeah, so until then, the story we discussed and plenty of others are available at statenews.com. Thank you to Emilio for coming on again. Thank you to my podcast coordinator, Taylor, who's doing a great job. And most of all, thank you for listening. For the 1909, I'm Alex Walters.